Okay, that looks great. So good, we're recording and I think we're also live now on Facebook. So if you've just joined us, welcome. I'm Jo Gore. I'm here with Anna, who's about to start her session on social and emotional learning in classroom management. How are you today, Anna?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to this session because there's so many people there from all sorts of places all over the world, which is amazing.
That's great. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well. Where are you joining us from?
I'm in Dubai.
Right. Okay, live from Dubai. And what's the weather like today in Dubai?
We have a quick look outside. It's always sunny. It's
I can
always.
see the sun. Good. Here it's cold. It's cold and rainy in Barcelona, so nice that you're bringing some sunshine. Okay, so before I hand over to you, I'll just tell everyone a bit more about you. So Anna is a primary-based English language teacher and teacher trainer. She's based in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, as she just told us, and she's worked in a range of global contexts for education ministries, for the British Council, for UNICEF, and educational publishers. And Anna's really passionate about teaching teens and young learners, and particularly interested in research about social and emotional learning. So we're really excited to hear what you have to say. I'm going to hand over to you. You can share your slides now, Anna. And I'm here if you need me, but I'm just going to turn off my camera until the end.
Lovely. Thank
Great.
you so much, Joanna, for your lovely introduction.
Over to you.
Let me go and find my slides as well. Technology. So just quickly checking in the chat box if you can see my slides. Give me a plus or yes. Is that lovely? Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Joanna, Kath, and Melissa for making this happen this year. I'm very excited to be here. And thank you to all of you being here and taking time out of your busy schedules. I know for loads of us teachers, December is a very busy month with the festive season coming and holidays on its way. So I really appreciate that you are here. So yes, I'm very passionate about this topic and it's going to be a challenge to get it all fitted in my 45 minutes. But as always, you can always connect to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. And like Joanna just said, you will get a handout from the session as well with a bit of a summary and some activities for you. But enough about me. I would like to find out a little bit about your context you're teaching in. So if you could, in the chat box, let me know if you teach primary learners and give me 1, 2 for secondary. Maybe you have adult learners. Maybe you teach a mixture, you're number 4, or maybe you don't even teach. Goodness me, Joanna, that chat box is really going fast, right? Good. I can see all sorts of different numbers. I could see, I think, Alan, teacher education as well. Yeah, higher grades, primary. 5, that's wonderful, everything. Lovely. So the reason I'm asking this is because the ideas I'm going to share with you today, they're based on my own research in social emotional learning and well-being, educational psychology, more or less. And I've tried them out in my classes with my primary school kids in New Zealand, with secondary learners. But of course, I'm not going to give you a golden recipe or this is going to work with your learners. I think it's really important that in today's webinar, you take note of what you think might work for your learners and then adapt it to your learners. You know your students the best and you know what works best in your culture. So I don't want to say I'm an expert on this topic, but I'm sharing my ideas and I like you and invite you to use them and see how you can adapt them to make them work in your context. So most of the activities we're looking at today can be used either with secondary, primary and adults, but again, adapt as needed. So good. Then my second question for you today is to check very quickly, how are you feeling today? I think for some of you, it might be very early morning. For some of it is afternoon already, maybe evening for some of you as well. If you say, you know what, let's keep it simple, you can choose one of these numbers. Although I see already in the chat box, wonderful, a little bit tired, Rodriguez. That is absolutely okay. Yeah, I can see somebody going, well, I'm not entirely sure, maybe a number 2. Maybe different. And number 4, very excited. Peckish, lunchtime, under the weather, cold. Yeah. Keen, lovely. So I think a very important thing is when we teach our students, it's very important that we take the time to actually just find out what's going on, how they are feeling. So an activity like this gives you some sort of insight in what they bring to the classroom, what is their emotional state they bring to the classroom. And there is no wrong or right answer. Like Sylvia is saying, okay, I didn't sleep well. That's okay. If we know that as teachers, we can really adapt our approach to either the classroom or that individual student. Because as you know, we don't just teach a language, we teach people. And there's so much going on in our lives at home that we might not see. So not everybody will come to class like a jumping dog, and not everybody will always feel ready for learning. So it's really important that we check in. And I don't know if you use activities like this already in your classroom. I call it a pulse check or simply a mindful check-in. I try to plan it for every lesson. There are lots of different ways I'm going to show you later that you can do this with your students. And it's sort of an opening routine. My students know that there is a question, and also very much in a Zoom classroom where we don't have 100 or 300 people, or a face-to-face classroom, I get them to turn to the person next to them. And if they want, share why they're feeling the way they're feeling. So it really is completed at the start of class. It gets them into English mode. They can use their language, but also I get to hear a little bit what is going on. And as some of you said this morning, tired, cold, a bit under the weather, maybe not ready for learning yet, as we would say in the primary classroom, I think the next thing we can do is something that actually shifts that mode. So if students feel a little bit, it is very hard for our students to actually start learning, right? Because I don't know how much you know about the brain, but very much what they say, the brain is a tool that, sorry, I think my slide just went. Let's put it back on. Here we go. That has all these different regulation systems. So one of the systems in our brain is that system that is trying to protect us, a threat system. If you're very worried, that's really activated. Well, if we want to learn, we want to go to a different regulation system, our drive system, which really wants to achieve. If we relax and feel safe, we're in our soothing system. So one of the things, if our brain is very much worried about things going on, it cannot pay attention. And I think as teachers, we all know that paying attention is essential for learning. If you're not attending, you cannot encode that, you cannot store that knowledge in front of you. So what we want to do with our students is get them to a resourceful state for learning. Now, I cannot take away their stress, their worries, and their concerns, but I can sort of shift their mode, that brain state, that mental state, to something a little bit more lighter, positive. So I'm going to invite you to think about a color fest. I love colors, as you can see. So I'm very happy with the background we have today as well. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to think about a color that makes you happy. You don't need to share it. If you want, you can. But once you've got a color in mind that makes you happy, you can close your eyes for a minute if you want to and visualize 6 items with that color. If you want, you can even label them. You can name those items. I see some beautiful colors in the chat box. Mauve, green, rainbow, red. So name 6 items that have that color. Visualize them, see them in front of you. Baby blue, wonderful, pink, purple. Pomegranate, Fatima, that is a beautiful color as well. Golden sun, Merlit. Great. So then I ask my students to open their eyes again if they have closed them. Some of them just might stare up to the ceiling and visualize. And then I ask my students, how are you feeling now? So you just had a look at these items with your favorite color, with that color that makes you happy. Roses, a heart, as Danita is saying, maybe shoes or pens with that color. How do you feel now? Does it change anything in your emotional state? Better. Amal, thank you. Lighter. Right. Oh, it does. That's great. Warmer. So a very simple activity like this, it doesn't cost you a lot of planning time as a teacher. You can ask them to share it again with the person next to them so they actually use that language to describe the items and why is blue your favorite color. But it can really just take our brain to a different regulation system and lighten up that little bit of burden that we felt when we came into the classroom. So relax, Wafa is saying. Lovely. Good. So with my primary kids, I would say, I think we're now ready for learning. So let's have a look. We get back to this activity later on again as well. So what do I want to do? We're going to talk about, of course, what is classroom management? What's your definition? What is social emotional learning? Then we're going to look why cell is actually very invaluable in our classroom and some practical ideas. Now, you just had 2 practical activities already, but there will be more in the coming 40 minutes as well. So let's get started then and start with classroom management. So good. Before I'm going to talk about it, I always like to find out what your vision is. How would you describe classroom management? So in the chat box, can you give me a simple definition of classroom management? And please don't worry about typos because I know if you're joining us from a mobile device, it can be very fiddly. Yeah, so classroom management is, and let me know in the chat. What's your definition? I see, I'm saying good rapport. Lovely. Techniques the teacher uses to organize. Maha, creating a peaceful environment. Saudat is saying it's time management. Olga, it's personal bonding. Sana, a facilitated learning environment. Hani is saying a safe learning environment. Wow, Gabrielle, working as a group. There are so many answers. Thank you for being so active because it means I'm not going crazy talking to my screen today. Yes, guiding their work, Mark, engaging your learners. Mohammed Al-Zamir, a long definition that went so fast, but thank you for putting that in the chat. Good. I'm very happy to see that a lot of you are talking about the learners. You're talking about organizing the learners, building that rapport, engaging your learners. Maria is saying fostering a positive, productive atmosphere in the classroom. And that is beautiful. I'm very happy to see that because classroom management is so much more than just controlling or disciplining our learners. There are all sorts of aspects involved. And I think, Kyla, you're very right. It's about creating an engaging, positive learning environment for our students. So very much a concept that's much broader than that discipline. It's very much includes everything the teacher says, the teacher does, to involve those learners in the learning process and achieve the educational goals and learning outcomes we have got set for our learners. But it's actually, I think we would be able to divide it in 2 dimensions. One, of course, is that physical dimension, moving your students around, setting up the activities, having them working in pairs and maybe in certain spaces in the classroom. The second dimension would be more that social emotional management, as you can see in this definition here, how to get them interacting and behaving in pro-social ways that are appropriate and conducive to learning. And I think particularly over the last few years after the COVID crisis, it's become a lot more recognized how important having social emotional skills actually is for educational success. It was also something in the 1980s we spoke about in language learning, the effective turn. So it's not something new. I think even Plato 2000 years ago spoke about all learning is depending on emotions, but it's sort of become more important again to make this a point in our classroom. Because nowadays we've got a lot of students coming to the classroom that missed maybe 2 years of working together in a learning environment with other learners. So it's very much about helping learners develop cognitively, while also strengthening their emotional and their social skills. So, good. So now we know that classroom management is much broader. I think it's time to quickly look at social emotional learning. What is a definition of social emotional learning? And I thought before we're going to look at that, I'd just like to find out how familiar you are with that concept of social emotional learning. Because looking back at my own teacher training, I didn't really get a lot of training in social emotional skills as a teacher, as a primary school teacher, as a language teacher. So there's so many definitions out there. Okay, so I get people saying I've got no knowledge about social emotional learning. I've got people saying I'm quite knowledgeable already. Wonderful. Please help me out in the chat box. Great. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I think a lot of teachers and teacher educators have not experienced any input or any focus in our training on this really, really important area. Yeah. So Jason, like you're saying, no knowledge. Yeah. And I'm sure that when we go through the session, you're going to see you know so much about this already. You just haven't used that label before, like Malika saying, empathy is an aspect of it. Totally. So a lot of this will not be new to you. We just haven't labeled it as social emotional learning. Now, like I said, there are many definitions out there. And I don't want to go and ask you, write me a definition. So I thought, let's do something else. Let's go and look at social emotional learning by what it is not. So I'm going to give you 6 different sentence endings, and 3 of them are not social emotional learning. Yeah, so they actually don't fit. They're just not, it's not true about social emotional learning. So here are your 6 sentences. Have a read and have a think. Which ones do you think are not correct? Badijani, a lovely definition talking about interpersonal skills there. Fatima, thank you for your answers. And the chat box is going crazy again. I see lots of beautiful answers. Ivanka, thank you. Jason, great. So social emotional learning is not. Yes, so have a good look at number 1. Is it only for children? Aha, great. So indeed, I can see people going, no, Diana, thank you. Cecilia, lovely. It is not only for children. I'm going to show them here. It is actually, these are human skills. They are not kids' skills, if you want to put it that way. Social emotional skills, like Malika just said before, empathy, kindness, those skills are not only for children, they're also something that we need to have in life to get on, to be able to relate to other people, to be able to take responsible decisions, to actually function well in our context, right? And it's not completely unrelated to language learning. You might, and some teachers totally think we don't really know what it does in the language classroom. But research, and more now we have all these electrodes you can put on the brain. It's proven that if people are not able to manage their thoughts or their emotions or their behavior, language learning or any learning is much harder. So it's very much the foundation of any learning. If you're socially or emotionally not really feeling safe, there's no psychological safety in my classroom. Emotionally, I'm very worried about something that's going on. Again, that brain, as I said before, is just not able to activate the prefrontal cortex to the extent that it needs to actually take in what we do in the classroom. So it is totally related to any learning and teaching. It's not a distraction. If I look at language teaching, it's maybe even more so related, because when we look in our classrooms, we might have students from all sorts of different backgrounds and cultures, and emotions and social interactions are highly culturally situated. You learn what you see in your environment, right? So that's where I think it fits in very nicely in language teaching. So good, Mohammed. Indeed, it is not a one-off, right? It is very much a process that we go through in life. And you might say, well, it is for children because they still need to learn or strengthen these skills. I think when we look again at research, it's something that is not innate, and we pick it up in our environment, often from our caretakers or parents. And also, it's not only for students with behavioral issues, Mohammed. Indeed, even some adults I know can benefit from strengthening these skills, because if you're not exposed to it at home or in the environment you grow up, you might not further develop them. So it's not innate, it is very much nurtured. So the most common system, if you want, you can research this after the webinar a bit more. That link will be on the handout as well. Probably the most well-known model is from Cassell, the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning in the States. It started in 1994, and you might have heard from a book by Daniel Goldman about emotional intelligence and social intelligence. He is one of the starters of this Cassell framework as well. And Cassell really highlights 5 dimensions. Now, like I said, this is one of the many models, but I think it works really well in a teaching context, because our students need to make decisions, choices about their personal behavior, but also about their social behavior, choices about how to act in life in our communities. Our students have to build relationships. They need to work in teams. They have to deal effectively with agreement and disagreement in the classroom. They need to be aware of other learners, their feelings. Empathy, Malika, goes in this one very, very much. And also they need to have that self-management to manage their emotions and behaviors to achieve what they want or need to achieve in life. And it all starts with that self-awareness, recognizing your own emotions, your values, your feelings, before you can manage them, so you can interact, build relationships, and take responsible decisions. So indeed, it's also very much necessary for teachers. Yes, I come to that point in a minute. I very much agree with you. So if you want to research that more, this is the model from Cassell, and they have this as a definition. And you can see very clearly that they have highlighted and adults, right? Because it is not something we're born with. It's not innate in that way. And all these different definitions, when you start looking at them, they all have in common that they talk about intrapersonal skills relating to myself and interpersonal skills that help us thrive in life. And of course, also very much highlighting that it helps us build and support our communities. And I think this is where it links very nicely to classroom management, because a key role, as we saw before, for the teacher is to create a classroom that has that sense of community, where our learners feel safe, comfortable, express their thoughts, and work together with others. Yeah, so that is really fitting as a classroom community. Now, I quickly want to introduce you to another model. This is a model that from a book that came out on the 15th of November, Activities for Social Emotional Learning, Developing Social Emotional Competences in the EL2 Classroom, written by me and my dear colleague Louise. And we have actually adapted it slightly to the ELT community, because we thought it is more important there that we look at different cultures, because a lot of us work with students of different cultures. Also because a lot of our students live in host countries. Like my students in New Zealand from Korea, for example, they need to learn what's appropriate in different cultural contexts as well. And also language learning is not the same as learning other things like science or mathematics. So it's very much affecting our identity and that self-esteem. So this is our model. And again, that really starts with, Isaiah was saying, it starts with us. And I very much believe it starts with us as a teacher. Yeah. So these are some different areas or levels or dimensions of social emotional learning. And if you still wonder why it's so important to focus on this, because sometimes when I talk about this topic, people say, yeah, but I teach adults. I mean, I'm an English teacher, not a social worker. Then I start to ask teachers, like, have you ever thought about what happens in your classroom? And I hope, please, let me know that I'm not the only one. But I'm going to give you 6 or 5 different statements, and please let me know if you've ever experienced this in your classroom. Yeah, because if not, then I'm really the only one. But have you ever experienced students that went really quiet and seemed quite shy using their English? Diana's saying yes. I'm so happy that some other people are saying yes, because sometimes we wonder as teachers, is it us? Yeah, you're definitely lovely. Thank you, Hakima Saimat. Beautiful. Even with adults, and even more so possibly with adults, and maybe even more so in certain cultures. What about, have you experienced students who just don't like working with other students? Yes, some of the issues, as somebody just said in the chat box, are very similar for adults and younger learners. Lovely. So a lot of us recognize this actually, and I bet you recognize this one as well. They just sometimes do something in the classroom, they say something, and you think, oh my goodness, do you not realize what that actually does to the other students? The word choice or maybe the body language. Ikram, yes. Lovely, Masood. All those challenges we face. So, and also I've got students who just don't seem to be able to focus. It's very hard to get them started on a task. I can see why with IELTS writing tasks too, but still, learners are sensitive. Abdul, yes, correct, and lovely. And some of my learners, and I think you might have experienced that too, they just struggle to agree in their groups. Andrea saying there's always one like this in the classroom. This is the beauty, right? We're working with people, everybody's unique, and you mix them and put them together, and that has a really interesting effect, as Kath and I were just talking about, the classroom dynamics with our students. Good. Yeah, so I'm glad I'm not the only one. And I think when we talk about learning, this is all very normal that we feel maybe a little bit challenged, because learning, what we do in our job as teachers, actually we push students outside their comfort zone with everything we do that's new. Because they don't know it yet, they need to learn that language. So you probably recognize this image of the zone of proximal development. However, I always think it doesn't really exactly look like this in my classroom, because this is plain sailing, right? When I look at teaching my students something they can't know yet and I'm supporting them, there is this interaction happening already. And within that interaction, I've got some students who are absolutely loving it. I've got some students who are getting very frustrated with their own abilities or lack of abilities. Because even though we support and scaffold, it is not always plain sailing for our learners. So here it's very important, as Aisha just said, that we teachers are self-aware and have those tools to self-manage our behavior, our comments, because we might otherwise say things we're going to regret. Yeah, and the students need to learn that too, particularly if students are working together in groups. They might not always agree or might not always be of the same level. That can cause tension or some sort of friction, Hanadi, particularly with writing tasks. And in addition to that, a lot of us might be teaching according to that communicative language teaching approach. That is very much about meaningful learning through social interaction, right? And what do students need to do? They need to work together and communicate. So looking at that, I would call that they need social skills to do this. They need to know how to relate to other people, how to communicate, how to nicely disagree, for example. And you can only do that if you're able to recognize and manage your own thoughts and emotions, and also can see that somebody else might be getting a little bit upset with you. So you can sort of calm down the situation. And those are your emotional skills. They support the social skills, and they are all necessary for communicative language teaching. Ivanka, exactly. These are all different skills that our students, I don't know if we get taught them explicitly. I never had that. But I think it's even more important when you work in different cultures with students from a variety of contexts. So again, you are the expert in your culture, because social skills, emotional skills, what is the norm is not the same in every country. But that's a beautiful thing to talk about and to start respecting as well. Yeah, to start learning and appreciate those differences. I was just saying teachers need to encourage and adapt inclusivity totally. And that's a big thing when we have a safe learning environment where we can talk in an appropriate way about the differences. We can actually show that we have that cultural responsiveness and appreciate those differences, celebrate the differences. So in a nutshell, sometimes in our classroom, and this is very much why we often see classroom management as disciplining or sort of managing that behavior, learners feel that they're challenged or their needs are not met, and thoughts start to develop that leads to feelings in the body and emotions, and that leads to certain actions that might not always be pro-social or beneficial for the context. It affects themselves, the feeling, how they feel about themselves, how they are going to respond. That impacts your classroom dynamics. And this is why the learning can be impacted. I always think if we can't manage our classroom, there is very little chance for learning to happen. So if we integrate social emotional activities to develop those competences for ourselves and our learners, we're actually creating better conditions for that learning. So good. Sarah is saying the administration should be considered too. And I think, Sarah, that's a really valid point. Ideally, social emotional competence development is something as a whole school approach. It doesn't only happen by one teacher or in one lesson. It's something as a group of teachers or the school leadership decide this is how we're going to deal with it. Yeah. Lamia, self-awareness. Of course, self-awareness can be over-awareness, that we become very much shy. Oh my goodness, I made a mistake. But I think self-awareness of knowing how we come across when I'm going to lose the plot and I'm going to explode, my anger volcano, for example, that can actually, if you're aware of that, you can stop that from happening and have a breath, break that pattern, count down from 5 to 1. So you're actually really activating that frontal cortex, and then you can respond in a different way instead of react. So it is very important for the social relationships. If you say, I'm very self-aware, of course, some students are shy. And sometimes I wonder if it's being shy or not wanting to be seen. But that's a different discussion, but I very much see your point. Good. So now we talked a little bit more about social emotional learning already. I'm sure that you already do a lot of things to actually develop these skills. Yeah, that relationship building, that self-awareness, that self-management, responsible decision taking. Can you let me know in the chat box how you already incorporate some of these things in your lesson? Because I don't know who it was. I think it was James maybe before he said, and Malika said empathy. We already use a lot of this in our classroom. Antonina, you talk about feelings with your students. That's a really nice thing to share with learners. And also it teaches vocabulary. It gives you the opportunity to build and extend that, of course. Feelings and emotions, Yusuf is saying. I think in a lot of young learner classrooms, we get the pictures of emotions, happy, sad, yes. Kindness week, Deeplaka, that is a beautiful idea. Focusing on kindness, respecting others. I don't know who wrote it because it went so quickly, but thank you for contributing. Suja is also talking about kindness. Almas is talking about sympathy and empathy. What's the difference? Yeah, lovely. And by dealing with everyone according to their feelings, Masood. So a lot of this as teachers, we actually do, right? We have this willingness to sort of help and support our learners in the classroom, building their self-confidence. Very nice. Adapting lessons to their culture. Good. So I think one thing that we already started with today is a very short activity that our students can just check in how they're feeling. Yeah. Then we also looked at a quick activity that we can get you to a resourceful state for learning. There are lots of other simple ways that you can do that. We can give them an entry ticket, the opposite of an exit ticket, where they can write down how they feel. What's the weather like? Cloudy, sunny, shiny, rainy, thunder. And if you want, they can talk about it. They can draw it. You can have a poster on the wall with different feelings. Students write their name on the back of a sticky, and then they stick it on that poster so you know where your students are. Or you can get students to ask the register. They say the name, for example, Joanna, how are you? And Joanna will say, I'm fine, and then nominates the next person. Fine, thank you for asking. Kath, how are you? And somebody might say, I'm okay. I'm not great. Then we can ask and see how we can support that student. Yeah, so the register rotation is quite an effective way. But indeed, it all starts with us being aware of how we come across as teachers and what we actually maybe can do better, because I think we can all always improve ourselves. So really knowing what we're feeling, why we're feeling like this, and also being aware of how that impacts our learners. So if you want to think of something for yourself and see, okay, is there anything I can improve? A nice activity for you is to think about is how you want your students to feel in the classroom. Yeah. And maybe kind of saying connected. Yes, connecting with students is really important. You want students to be interested. Sahra is saying, I want my students to feel engaged, happy. Ahmed is saying, well, comfortable, Ola. Thank you. So any of those words, write them down, maybe select 3. I've given you a selection here, but whatever you like, and then start to think about that one. I want my students to feel comfortable. Yeah. What do I already do to encourage that they feel comfortable? Could I actually do more? And that inspires Sophia, a very nice one. I want my students to feel inspired. And then I start to realize maybe I actually don't do that much to make them feel inspired. What could I do? Maybe say certain things, create certain activities, So for this, you can do this anytime you want to with other teachers or on your own. Some beautiful things in the chat box. Confident, very, very nice. So again, we need to be able to manage ourselves in that reaction. I need to calm my emotions as a teacher. Equally, my students need to be able to calm their emotions and manage those reactions. Yeah, so we can actually focus on the task at hand. And as I said before, we can do some very simple breathing techniques. In the handout after the webinar, you'll find some examples of box breathing, shape breathing. They hold something and breathe in, breathe out. Or like I said, backwards counting is very powerful, from stopping your emotions to take over and going back to that prefrontal cortex. And you could even, adjust, you do this in large classes. Yeah, get students to grab something, breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold, breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. Bit slower, of course, but yeah. So that is a very useful technique. Moving on to that community in our classroom, where we want students to be able to communicate appropriately together, where we want students to be able to take the right decisions, show their social responsibility. I think a very simple activity, instead of having a classroom contract, is to sort of make a table of what we expect of each other in the classroom. Yeah, this is also known as the power of 3 in primary schools, and it is about students telling you, how can we take care of ourselves? We collect lots of ideas on stickies, for example. How can we show that we take care of others? Ideas, how can we take care of our community, our classroom context? And together with your students, you can select the most important things, and you can come up with a beautiful wall chart where we have said we want to help each other, we want to respect differences, we see the best in others. So this is a way that you can teach your students the behavior that you want to see in your classroom, socially, and emotionally managed. And you can go back to that chat, point at it if there are any challenges in your classroom. Now, of course, with teenagers, this is not something appropriate, but with teenagers and adults, we could do an exploration of concepts they find important. It could be friendship, it could be kindness, it could be empathy, it could be belonging in my classroom. Get them to think about that word in their language, but then get them to think about what it actually feels like, what it would look like when you look at it, and what it sounds like, what language is being used here. They can come up with the definitions. This is why it's useful to get them to think back to a memory they had. And then as a class together, we can decide, okay, how are we going to show empathy or kindness in our classroom? And you can stick that, for example, on a community wall. Friendship, empathy, kindness. So we can actually, if we're not sure, are we actually kind? We can go back to the wall and have a look at what it is. You can put it on a Padlet, very nice, a positive concept Padlet or a friendship Padlet. Again, sometimes you need to have challenging conversations with your students, and this is not for young learners, but more teenagers and adults. And I think when we say, you did, or I saw that, often the brain goes into that threat response. So language that you can use that might actually calm our brain down and keeps it open for communication is based on non-violent communication, a concept Rosenberg developed in 2015. And it is about what you noticed, the action you observed, asking your students to tell them what was going on. And then restating, oh, so I heard that this happened. Okay, I hear how you're feeling. Thank you for sharing. However, it makes me feel worried as a teacher because I need you to work with your partner to develop that language, to practice your language. So can I ask you next time, take a few deep breaths and try again and work with your buddy? Or can I ask you next time to say you're not happy with that question and help him find the question you do want to answer? Is there anything I can do to support you? I think this works. And Sarah is just saying she's done that with students, 10 to 12-year-olds. I think that age group, Sarah, is totally able to do that. When I talk about young learners, 5, 6-year-olds, I think that is very, very challenging. But that age group, lovely to hear that that works. It's all about talking instead of reacting. We want to respond appropriately. Now, one other activity which is very powerful, and you can also find that in our book, is about regular reflections. When students did some pair work or some group work, we can get them to reflect about what was it like. You can even give them a sentence. I was patient, yes or no. We helped each other, yes or no. The best thing was, the most challenging thing was, da 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 da. Next time I will, da 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 da. So you can actually get them to think about that interaction. By getting them to think about it, you open up the opportunity for discussion with your students. And when there is an opportunity for discussion, you can feed in what you like your students to do. And somebody just said in the chat box, let me go back because I don't know who it was. Nevin, beautiful, modeling. I think one of the most powerful things in teaching, which is often underused, is modeling. If we want our students to behave in an appropriate manner, to control their emotions so they can actually interact in a socially appropriate way, we need to model that behavior as well. So getting us to think about and reflect on our interactions with our students is a very powerful tool too. And then adapt if you think this is not really what I want to do. That is fine. It all happens. We all make mistakes, but I think from reflections, we can learn so much. Yeah, we're not perfect. Nobody is perfect, and you don't need to be the perfect teacher. But as long as we learn from what didn't go that well, we can hopefully do better next time. And indeed, Eli saying group work is really good because they can discuss. And this is what we want, of course, in communicative language teaching. But also, it's a very good opportunity for them to practice these social and emotional skills. Good. Um, so when we talk about social emotional learning or social emotional competences such as self-management, self-awareness, mindfulness, a lot of these can be divided in different stages. So as teachers, I think it's really useful to familiarize yourself with proactive strategies. What can I do to get myself prepared and in that mode, right? To get myself ready to actually be able to model this. I can do that with my students too. How can I get them ready for learning? What techniques can I teach them, such as the breathing, the counting backwards, the shape breathing, for example, that they can use in the moment when they start to feel they are going to lose it. Yeah. So that is really, really important. Managing the now. The reflective strategies, those ones we can do after our teaching at the end of the activities for our students to reflect on. Good. In a nutshell, I was going to actually ask you this, but I think the answers just came up. I'm going to give you a second to have a look at that while I look at the chat box. If you know any answers, I'll come back to you in a minute because there's so many messages and they go very fast. Grace has a very interesting question. What to do if students don't want to share their emotions? I think we cannot force our students, Grace, to share emotions. And some people are better at it than others. The most important thing is that you build up a relationship with your students. And when time is ready for them, they feel safe enough, they will share in one way or the other. It might not always be that they share with their words. They might say, I hate drawing, right? Maybe the message is not, I hate drawing. Maybe the message is, I don't think I'm good enough at this, or I'm frustrated. So we also have to think about what actually is the real message behind those words. Drawing is always a good one for students. Get them to doodle, get them to work with words, write words down that they are feeling without you having to see it, and they can color over it, for example. Yeah, so it is hard if students are not ready. We can't force them, but when your relationship is when they start to trust you more and more, they will be willing to share step by step. That's my belief. Right, lots of answers there. Vesna, yes, indeed. Tamsin, not innate. Svetlana, lovely. Thank you for sharing. So yes, it is not only that we need that safe culture to get cell developing further, it's also that social emotional learning activities build that positive classroom culture even further. And like I said before, they're not innate, but they help learning. They're very much the base, the foundation of any academic learning. And also they're skills that help our students do better in life. So it's not only about language teaching, it's integrated in that way because we're not teaching a language for the classroom. We're teaching a language for our students to use it outside the classroom. So my approach as a teacher is to purposefully plan, to optimize the opportunities, allow them to communicate, work in pairs, so they can practice those social and emotional skills. To welcome emotions. It's not bad if you feel frustrated. Talk about it, express it appropriately. Yeah, don't throw tools, but express it and let's talk about why you feel like that and what we can do about that. And when you have materials in your classroom with images or different cultures or values, exploit, dig in, ask questions about those different cultures, those different values, those diverse experiences. And of course, the basis of it all is to build that relationship with your students. Yeah, and to build good relationships, as Lamia is saying, we need to understand our own feelings first. And Ahmed, we need to be well. Yeah, the thing is, if we look after ourselves, we can better look after others as well. So I think I've come to the end of this, and I like you to think about a grateful reflection, something I do with my students as well at the end. One thing they appreciated in the lesson today, something maybe that inspired them, And if they've worked in teams, which we didn't do, you could say, which person in the classroom would you like to applaud? So I leave you with this to think about it while I'll see if Joanna has got any questions for me.
Anna, thank you so much. Well, there's plenty of questions, so it's great that we've got a little bit of time because I can see people are really engaged. It's something that we all know is really important, but it's not that easy, is it? So it's great. What I really enjoyed in your session was to see exactly how you do it, and your suggestions, like, excuse me, when you say, "How are you feeling today?" instead of just "How are you?" which immediately kind of it invites a genuine response somehow. And I made notes of the other things like your language, like I noticed you. Could you tell me a bit more?
It's a very interesting thing when you start to experiment with it. And this is actually, I think, what we just need to do, start experimenting. The response, if you say, I saw you did this, and you can see students go like, when you say, I
Yeah,
noticed, suddenly they're not so defensive. So even in teacher education, it is really, it just keeps the brain calmer.
yeah, exactly. It's kind of more like you're curious. You're not accusing, but you're like, oh, I noticed. What's going on there?
It's
Okay, let's
very
take some questions.
non-judgmental, right? It says no
Yeah,
judgment. I say,
yeah,
oh, I saw this. Tell me more. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. Okay, fantastic. I think people are still answering your questions, but you can stop sharing slides now, and then people can kind of see us fully. And let's take some questions. Okay, so what one person is asking, what should I do when my students say they don't want to learn and study and they are tired and bored?
There's a lot of questions in that one question.
Yeah, it's a
I think
hard one.
motivation is another topic. There's about, I don't know, 110 different theories on motivation. I think if they don't want to study, that really relates to motivation. So that is for me finding out, so what are your aims? What do you think is a benefit of doing this? What could be good for you? And then
Mhm.
if is I can watch more YouTubes, I can understand people on TikTok. Maybe that is what we need to remind them of as the driving force, and then think about how can we do what we need to teach in a TikTok or Instagram context: language, acting, recording answers, doing role play. So we get language in a way that for them links to their aim. And then engagement as well, I think very much thinking about, are they actually able to achieve it? Because there's nothing more challenging than getting a task from your teacher knowing you can't do it. So that level of competence, I think, is very important, and some choice.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So it's finding out more about, what's happening there. And it's actually good if they share that with you, right? Because it's an authentic answer, and then that leads to perhaps working out, like you say, what their motivations are or what's happening that day.
I think honestly, the core of what we do as teachers is relating to our students. And the most important thing is get to know them as the person, not just as a number in your register, but who are they? What are their interests? What is going on underneath that iceberg? Remember, we see
Yeah.
this, but there might be so much more that we don't know about.
Yes, completely. Um, okay, there are a couple of questions about actual activities. Like one person is saying, can you share more resources to find out interesting activities like Colour Fest? Um, this person says, I'm sad because I'm not so creative. Have you got any more kind of practical suggestions of how we can do that same thing in the classroom, but maybe with different ages as well? People are asking about adults and
Yes.
children.
Well, we've just written a book about this, of course. So I'm really going to recommend that people
Right.
have as well
Okay.
in that book.
Yeah. We'll
But
share the reference that's in the handout and it'll go
it
in the
is.
chat as well. Yes.
Yeah, but one of the things like fluency writing, I know a lot of students don't like writing, but we have to. So fluency writing is already a little bit lighter. I just get them to think about 3 things that make you happy this week. You've got 3 minutes and just start writing. So they're practicing their writing. They don't even know it, but they are. But also we're sort of lightening that brain space again, because when you talk or write about something that makes you feel good, your brain starts to change. The hormones change in your body. So that's something that you could do. Be
That's a really nice one. 3 things that made you happy this week. I like that.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
something you enjoyed in your holidays, or two things you were grateful for in 2024, your best holiday, something
yeah,
positive, and get them to talk about it or get them to write about it.
yeah. That's a really nice one. And they're writing just to share the experience. It's not about correction. It's not going to get a formal mark necessarily. Yeah.
And I don't even need to look at it. I could have a little journal that I say, you write in that, and once so often I might take it in and I respond to the student's content. But of course, as a teacher, I take notes in my own little booklet thinking, yeah, present perfect is still an issue. But I'm not going
Right.
to comment on that. It's all about their ideas, expressing their emotions and their feelings.
Right, exactly. And when you share something like that, you want an emotional response. You want the response to the content, not like present perfect is wrong. They're not going to share again. Okay. Let's see if we've got time just for one more. I think you dealt with the one about what about if they don't want to share your emotions. I think you talked about that. Do you have any suggestions, or do you think you can still do this with larger classes? So Fatima's asking about social emotional learning in larger classes, especially young children. Any
I'm I
tips?
I'm a firm believer after teaching large classes in Africa, where we like, I don't know, 150 students sometimes,
Right.
you can always do pair work. So there is no reason. It gets very loud for 4 or 5 minutes. I think that's okay. But we can give them something like talk about your best friend or your favorite toy. Turn to your elbow buddy. Just get them to talk a couple of minutes. And then you can say, okay, so how everybody stops, you get the attention back. How did it make you feel talking about your favorite toy? Why does it make you feel so happy? So I think in the feedback, you can feed that in chorally while they have talked about it in their pair. So I do think there is an opportunity to do that. Maybe a little bit less because you don't want to
Mm.
disturb your teachers next door. But I wouldn't say I'm going to avoid it because my class is too large. I think there's always an
Mm.
opportunity. And when you give written feedback, you can also give that content feedback again on a happiness or maybe a less happy emotion your students have expressed.
Yeah, I love that. So it's worth remembering that the emotional content can be, shared with a partner. It doesn't always have to go via the teacher. Okay, that's great. I'm so sorry, but we've got no more time today for questions, but you're back with us on Facebook in January, aren't you? So don't miss that session. We'll share the details of the Q&A on Facebook in the email that you all receive. And that's it. We're coming back in 15 minutes for our next session with Teresa Bestwick. Anna, thank you so, so much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm looking forward to the next session already.
It's been a pleasure. So thanks, Kath, for moderating, and Naomi on Facebook. We'll see you all in 15 minutes. See you shortly.